This is the first Pages panel. It's probably the most popular panel because everybody likes to hear their first pages read. We are going to try to get through as many of them as possible. I will be reading them in the order that they were submitted because I think that's the most equitable way to do it.
As a quick note, could you all make sure to lean into the mics and project your voice as best you can so that the recording picks it up and the folks who are via stream can hear it too?
You mean like don't be quiet like I normally am?
And pull the mic over.
We're sharing. Okay.
I'm just loud naturally.
Perfect.
I'm going to let each of these ladies introduce themselves to you, a very brief intro, and then we'll dive in with the first page of the first pages.
You can hear me?
Yeah? Oh,
Yes.
there
you go.
Yeah. I'm Lauren Spieller. I work at Folio Literary Management. I work on lots of different kinds of things, middle grade, YA, adult. I do a teeny little bit of nonfiction now and again, but mostly I'm working on fantastical stories and realistic stories, and I just really like a dead body in everything that I represent, I've noticed. But I kind of do it all. So I hope to hear from you.
I'm Erin Clyburn. I'm an agent at Howland Literary, and I also do sort of a wide variety of things. I do middle grade, sort of everything in middle grade. I do young adult fiction as well. I do adult fiction and nonfiction. And I mainly gravitate toward things that are weird and dark and kind of have a dash of horror or something strange going on.
Hi, I'm Nicole Payne, and I'm at Cobb's Literary Services. I'm also a little bit of everything, but it's mostly young adult and up. Romance, mystery, suspense, sci-fi, fantasy, and I'm trying to branch into a little bit more of nonfiction.
I'm Michelle Jackson, and I'm at LCS Literary, and I've primarily been focused on adult, and I'm branching off into young adult and even some picture books. I'm definitely looking at the illustrators in picture books, and I love the dark, but I definitely love a lot of work that have a lot of inspiration and hope, and a lot of hopeful endings. So I absolutely love romance as well, and retellings. You name anything like that, that's my world right there. So, thank you.
All right, we're getting started. Thank you. All right. Is this good?
A little bit.
Is this better?
You gotta be like
A little bit loud.
Okay, how about this?
Teacher voice. Teacher voice.
This is going to be awkward, but here we go. The Nightshade, young adult fantasy. Wanted, the Nightshade. Reward, 100,000 gold rubies. Information leading to the capture of the thief, calling himself Nightshade, will be rewarded. Last known location, Upper City, South Bazaar. I crumple the parchment and drop it into the ditch on the side of the dusty street. It disappears into the accumulated muck. 100,000 gold rubies. The desperation of the city guards reeks like the refuse pile beside me. This is the third rise in reward money since the notices were posted a year ago. And yet, they still need information on the thief calling himself the Nightshade. I glance down at the subtle lines of my curves and grin. Good luck finding himself. I walk towards the eastern gate, the wanted poster already forgotten, and secure the hood of my cloak over my head, hiding my choppy midnight hair. When I took the knife to my hair last night, like I do every moon, I made sure to leave it just long enough to pull it back. The wall looms above me, separating the upper and lower city, allowing the merchants and aristocracy. No, start.
No, they said, isn't it 3? What's the one? It's 3.
Okay.
Oh, your hands went up already?
No, keep going. I already screwed it up. Keep going.
The 11th chime of the temple bell reverberates in the night, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Perfect timing. I hurry past the abandoned stalls in the lower city bazaar and reach the guard post. You promised me 3 minutes. Slipping into the shadows of the wall, I inhale the cool night air. Okay. You had your hand up first.
Okay, so for me, the reason why I raised my hand here is that important first page, and I was hearing a lot of outside information, but I really didn't think that I was getting enough on the character himself, on what was happening with him, especially when it started to say good luck finding himself. So I kind of had the idea that this is a Nightshade, but I didn't get anything else. So the rest of it for me was just describing what was going on in the scene. So that's kind of where I was pausing right there.
So I felt pretty differently. I'm just gonna look at it since it's in front of me. I didn't love the phrase "good luck finding himself,"
Yeah.
just the way it rolled off the tongue. But I do think that was the author actually pointing out the character's a girl, not a boy, and that's. Yeah, and I think honestly that's the kind of thing that's like maybe slips by because we're like hearing it rather than reading it. I actually liked the amount of description, and that we get a little bit of backstory, and then we find out that they're looking for the wrong person because it's a woman. It's actually a woman, not a man. Mm-hmm. But I do think that if I were to turn the page and get to page 2, I would want the story to like get moving.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I did like it.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
Whoever wrote this can send it to me.
All right. This is Southern Literary, and it is The Man Who Danced with Lonely Girls. In keeping with its status as the oldest and most prestigious community in town, the Mounds had but one apartment complex, Twin Oaks. They were constructed in the late 1940s on an awkward and unusable wedge of land that lay at the point where Forsythia Lane and Barbary Drive intersected at acute angles in an unholy intersection with Twin Oaks Road. A stream cut the property deeply, exposing the red clay and granite that lay beneath all the trim and manicured lawns of the homes in the Mounds. The developer, Walter Ramsbottom, had thought long about how to use this section of the Mounds to maximize his investments. So when no one else was looking, he had it rezoned for multiple family dwellings. Before the good residents of the Mounds could say injunction,
Hands.
My mind started to wander. Too much explication. I don't have a character to grab onto really. I just didn't feel focused, and I have to feel focused.
I just thought it had a lot of backstory, and I didn't really know about the characters and what's actually going on, me personally.
Yeah, I feel like I represent literary fiction, and I think that it is possible to like open with a sort of a bird's eye view and zoom in, but we got a little too granular here, and like just wanted to echo what Lauren said, that I was like kind of wandering after a second. I wanted to know more about what makes this place interesting and why the reader's going to want to read on, as opposed to just sort of the details of the backstory and construction of the apartment community.
Yeah, I think even when you're doing that bird's eye zoom, even when you're talking about like where we are, the character of a place, there still needs to be tension. There was no tension here. Nothing has to be specifically happening. There doesn't have to be like a dead body, for instance. But something, there has to be tension from somewhere, even if we can't identify exactly what it is. And here, I don't think there was any tension.
I will add really quickly that, like, which we stopped before we got there, but for the person that wrote this, a little bit further down where it kind of have The Mounds had talked seriously of dropping the Ram's Bottom from the membership list of the country club, and she'd been dogged by the rumor of a petition. I think that's where like the interest picks up, so you kind of want to kind of get to that, you know, a little bit. I think that had a little bit more, it speaks more of the conflict.
Let's see. This is Sybil Redeemed, and it's Christian fiction. Elements saw the truck speeding towards him through the heavy snow and sleet, but he thought it would move or slow down and not hit him. He was wrong. Medina and Ross were in the kitchen when the phone rang. Their parents had been in a car accident and were hospitalized. Medina screamed, asking if they were alive, but they just told her to get there as soon as possible. Ross wrapped his arms around her and said it would be okay. She looked at him incredulously. How could he say that? When Medina and Ross arrived at the emergency room,
Hands.
do we keep going?
No, hands. There were
Okay.
two hands.
Do we? I don't get started. For me, this one kind of is at fault for something that I see a lot in submissions, which is opening on an incident that's like very hugely emotionally charged, but we have just met all of these people and don't know anything about them or who they are or where we are or when we are. And for me, it's hard to like start with especially something as violent as someone being hit and killed by a car. Excuse me. And I know that scene needs to have a lot of emotional heft, but because I don't know who these characters are yet, it doesn't make me feel what I feel like that scene is meant to make me feel.
So, in the very beginning, where it started with one character, I was trying to visualize all this. So it starts in the beginning with LMS with, I guess, getting hit, but then it moves over very quickly to Medina. And so it's so that dramatic shift in it almost like changed a complete point of view. So you want to make sure zone in on whose point of view we're in here, and stay centered on that for the point of view. So I think that's what kind of shifted everything over for me, because in 2-3 lines we have 3 characters and one is already dead, you know, and so I didn't get the point of that even being there if it's going to focus on somebody that was in a kitchen. So at some point they were moving the pace, they were moving so fast that I was like, wait, now they're in the emergency room, how do you get that fast? I'm just getting, so I think it kind of touched with what Erin was saying, was that it's something this emotional, zoning on exactly where you want us to be. Are they at the scene of the accident, or are they in the kitchen talking about it, or are they at the emergency room, and kind of zone us into one scene, one area. That might help a little bit. Thanks.
This is fiction, and it's The Hunt. Not fast enough. The words pounded in the black wolf's skull as his racing paws slipped and skittered over rain-slicked boulders and stuttered through clinging mud. Ragged fur tore off in brambles as easily as leaves abandoning their branches at winter's advance, leaving an unmistakable trail he couldn't outrun. Waves of lightning slashed the sky in rapid succession, casting the looming oak in sharp relief. Its presence meant the ravine stood just beyond. Just a few more lengths and he'd be there, a fitting in with his life, sins, and demons washed away in a single sweep of muddy water. Then the thunder broke, shaking Ebony from his paws and tossing him to the ground. The forest vibrated, the air roared, and darkness fell once more. By the time he regained his feet, he could sense the shifting of the pursuers in the shadows just beyond his sight. He glanced toward the oak as it began to groan and creak, leaning slowly and inexorably toward the ravine as the earth beneath it crumbled into the swirling abyss below. The shadows were all around him. There would be no reaching the ravine now, no justice as the river claimed them. All that remained was a final, brutal fight between monsters. Ebony breathed in sharply and turned his back on the ravine. "What are you waiting for?" he demanded, head swinging as he tried to count his enemies. Lightning lit the world again, and at last he locked eyes with one of his pursuers. The grinning red wolf flinched and retreated into the bodies behind him. There had to be 10 of them, and yet they hesitated. There was nothing else for it. Ebony knew what they were waiting for. He braced his paws in the deepening mud and lifted his nose to the gray-black sky. His howl reverberated through the air, despite the storm, challenging his enemies to come for him, to bring his death if they dared. The forbidden sound at last spurred them to action. They struck as the groaning oak gave up its fight and collapsed to the forest floor with a crash that shook the earth.
For a very first line of dialogue, "What are you waiting for?" feels a little too on the nose, or we've heard that line. You know, it's a little bit like we've seen it in a lot of movies. Just don't think it's a unique enough first line. And then it's actually repeated. He says, "What are you waiting for?" And then like a paragraph later, he says he knew what they were waiting for. So I think you need a new line. And I think also it would just be, he's running in the beginning. I think I wanted to know if he was being pursued or running toward a little more quickly so that I could get a better handle on the emotional, like I knew there was stress, but I wasn't exactly sure where like the tension was coming from.
I think for me, after a while, it felt like I was getting a complete story in the first page, and I just needed it to break down a little bit more for me so I fully understood everything that was going on. Bear in mind though that I'm just listening, so it's kind of different, but it kind of felt like a complete middle, beginning, and end that was going on for me.
Yeah, I had a similar thought. Knowing that this is a prologue, it made me wonder if this is a story that we need. It's hard to say without knowing much more. I'm especially curious about what the genre is here. Animal protagonist is kind of a rare thing to see in like adult fiction, and it makes me wonder, is this like a fantasy series where all of the like this is about warring wolves, or I'm curious to know more. It's a little hard to comment without knowing more about genre here, but yeah, I did wonder, because it's a prologue, like where the story actually gets started.
This one is young adult fiction, Small Town Gods. I want to begin by saying that this is not a tale about the South. Stories like this can happen anywhere at any time. Nonetheless, this particular tale does take place in the South, the Deep South.
For me, I don't particularly, and this is my preference, like when a story starts with like, let me tell you this story. I prefer like being right in it, and so for it to say I want to begin by saying this is not particularly what I prefer to look for. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I raised my hand quickly because I don't want to be told right out of the gate what the story is or is not about. I just want to read the story. So if it is or isn't a story about the South that takes place in the South, we'll learn that just from the story getting off the ground.
So I didn't actually mind. Sometimes, you know how like every rule there's someone who can break it? If it had been, I want to begin by saying this is not a tale about the South. Stories like this can happen anywhere, at any time. If it had gone from there into something like surprising, But then, nonetheless, this does take place in the South. And I was like, well, then why did we start where we started? So I didn't mind that it was a little bit breaking that fourth wall, a little bit telly. It's just that I don't think it earned it.
Let's see. This is YA contemporary fantasy. Blood Dagger. Whose bright idea was it to start school this freaking early in the morning? I pull my Green Forester into a parking spot beneath a visitor sign and take a deep breath. Time for another awesome day of being basically invisible to everyone at my high school. Someone's bound to notice my lack of parking pass eventually, but so far I've flown under the radar. I guess maybe I should consider it a benefit, this seeming invisibility to those around me. It's like I'm so unremarkable, I can't even be remembered once someone walks away. Lifting my backpack to my shoulder, I heave myself out of the car and walk toward the school's main entrance. The hall inside is crowded with students rushing around, talking.
Hands.
I like that we get a little bit of I'm invisible, but then we just like stayed on it for too long. Anything else?
That was basically what I was going to say. I think we spend a little too much time, like right out of the gate. It's the morning, they're at school, and I really want to see what they're about to get up to instead of thinking about themselves. It's a lot of emotional stuff right out of the gate.
Agreed. And I was wondering, like, basically, like, it's telling again. I would prefer to, like, feel the invisibility rather than them just saying that they feel invisible.
That first line
I
got
did
a
like
laugh.
the beginning,
Yeah.
though. I did like the beginning.
The first
yeah.
line got a laugh. I think it's just like, then don't say in 3 lines what you can say in 1. Yeah. Keep moving.
This one is historical fiction, The Cost of Sin. 1975, Salt Lake City, Utah. Stacy pulls her rental car into the passenger pickup area of the airport, hoping the flight from Atlanta has landed. She leans her head on the wheel and closes her eyes. Deep breath in, slow release. Luke's knock on the car window interrupts her moment of meditation. Stacy, Luke asks as he opens the passenger door, "Are you all right?" Doing a little mental preparation, not because of you, well, maybe. The idea of introducing my fiance to Grandma is a little nerve-wracking. Toss your bag in the back seat and hop in. She looks him up and down. "Is that what you're wearing?" Luke shivers and lowers himself into the front seat. It was 70 degrees when I left Atlanta. Who knew it was still winter in Utah? Me. Stacy checks her mirrors and pulls into traffic. It'll warm up some next week and the snow will stop, but it's not yet spring in Utah. It'll take about an hour to get to Grandma Mert's house. I'll introduce you when we get there, so be ready. He chuckles. You said she's a little old farm woman. How bad can it be? Stacy narrows her eyes and attempts a serious look. Grandma's opinion is important to me and you need her approval. Luke stops laughing. And if she doesn't like me, what happens? Worst case scenario, the wedding's off. Stacy takes another deep breath and releases it as she drives. Best case, we'll have a lot to talk about. What do I need to say? Stacy glances at Luke for a moment and speaks slowly. It's not about what you say, it's about listening. Don't just hear her, listen to what she's telling you. Luke shakes his head. So I'm about to get lectured?
No. No, I gotta say, you read that well. So I'm just imagining though that if I were reading it, it seemed to be heavy on the dialogue, I think. So I think it's being answered in the dialogue, but definitely, I liked it overall, I think. But I think I do kind of want to know what's going on internally a little bit as well. I think there needs to be a little bit of balance there, especially, I mean, she starts off with her head, you know, and he comes in, and so I want to know, does I have to, I kind of think it has to do with the meeting coming, or is it him, or what is going on there. So I think we have to have a balance between the narrative and the dialogue, and that's where I would kind of caution a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like there was anxiety, but I didn't get enough of a sense of it and of why. So it went from her being anxious and having her head on the steering wheel, and then to a bunch of dialogue, and I want to know what is causing that and how she feels behind that.
I did like how much tension there was.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I want to see that.
Okay, let's see. Sweet Chance is adult fiction. It was sleeting. Alex hailed a taxi for Lincoln Center and ducked into the warmth of the car. During dinner with the Juilliard students, she remembered she'd left the notes from the first 2 performances in her dressing room. The building had 24-hour security, so she wasn't concerned. She let herself in the stage door entrance, and Greg Goldman, one of the night guards, gave her away from the security office. She passed the canteen and instrument storage. She turned and walked down the narrow corridor in the vast area under the Metropolitan Opera stage to the dressing rooms. It had been a long day with students, and she was tired. She leaned against the door frame, coated with many layers of gray paint, while she found the key. She unlocked the door, flipped on the light, and something jumped up from the love seat with a shriek. Alex took a step back toward the hallway and stifled a scream. They both froze, and then the intruder made a dash for the door. It was a kid. Alex stammered, how did you get in here? He or she turned toward the grate in the back wall and hesitated. Alex took a step, then put out a restraining hand. Stop. Who are you, and how did you get in? You need to. When Alex shifted, the kid bolted out the door and down the corridor. She stood in her dressing room. The air vibrated with the sudden shock. The kid, there was raw terror in those eyes, like she'd frightened a wild animal in her dressing room. She reached for her phone to call security.
Hands.
I saw this, I spoke with the author about this one earlier, so I know a little bit more about it. And this relationship between the adult and the child is very central. I think we're getting it too quickly. I think we need a little more lead in to get a sense for this main character before the inciting incident, which is meeting the kid.
For me, I feel like I didn't get enough sense of tone in this opening couple of paragraphs. It started not knowing the genre just beyond fiction. I felt like it was starting to get a little ominous with the 24-hour security and the description of her walking down this narrow corridor alone, and I was like, is something bad about to happen to her? But there's no, I didn't really get a sense for what I was supposed to be feeling about her while she's walking through this building. And then when she sees the child, again, I don't know how heavy or light this is, and I would love a better sense of what I meant to be feeling while I'm watching her just sort of walk through the building by herself.
Also, now having read it, I think this is, the author had said literary fiction. I would call this either women's fiction or commercial fiction.
Yeah.
This is Untitled, but it is thriller. The bright lights on the ceiling of the operating room shone down onto the patient's abdomen, making it hard for Dr. Thomas Wells to look directly at him. Normally, the anesthesiologist would be focused on the vital signs monitor and the patient's breathing. Today, however, he was having a hard time taking his focus off the procedure happening on the table. The surgeon, Dr. David Capere, had made the stab incisions and was placing the trocars into them. The procedure was a routine laparoscopic hernia repair. It would last around 60 minutes. Likely complications were almost zero, unless Dr. Thomas Wells went through with his plan. As the lights were extinguished, the room was illuminated only by the 2 high-definition screens the surgeon would be using to view the abdominal cavity as he performed the surgery. No matter how many of these procedures Tom observed, he was still in awe of how the surgeons were able to operate like this. The angle of the camera showed the abdominal cavity not only upside down, but backward as well. Tom watched the instruments being put into place and the procedure began. He had planned out the murder of Jason Bailey over and over till he had perfected it. Every moment mattered in his plan. But now that it was almost time to act, he was panicking. He was a good person, had become a doctor to help others, and although he struggled for a bit in medical school, he had achieved his goal. His struggles weren't academic related. During his mental health rotation, he began to struggle with his own mental health.
Hands.
So, for me, being a thriller, I just think that I'm expecting the tension or something almost right away. And so even if it starts with that bright light shining, but then as she read further down, when it says he had planned out the murder of Jason Bailey over and over till he had it perfected, I think that needs to be a little bit further up. I need get to that pronto. This is a thriller, and I think the earlier that you get to it, is the more it'll draw us in, especially knowing that it's a thriller, because the rest of it in between kind of felt a little bit telly. I did my research, I know what this should be, but I'm more into the thriller, getting into the tension, the conflict right away. I think that's my thought.
I agree, and I've spoken to the writer about this, and they pitched it, and it was very interesting the way they pitched it. But reading it, I agree, it could use a lot less telly, a little bit more starting from how he planned this. Yeah, basically that was the main thing that got to me. Also for me, because I come from a medical background, I did appreciate the medical side of things and the process and the procedure. So I applaud them for that.
I'm gonna dissent here. I actually really liked the opening, and I really love a good commercial thriller, and I liked the opening, and then I really was interested when it said unless Dr. Thomas Wells went through with his plan. I thought that was really fun. For me that worked, but I got lost when it started, actually when it said he planned out the murder of Jason Bailey over and over, and then went into that he was a good person. I was so in the moment that I wanted to stay in the moment. And I wanted to know, oh my gosh, what is he about to do here? And I can learn about his background later. But yeah, for me, I actually really liked the first few paragraphs here.
This is memoir, flying by the seat of my pants. I always thought you had to be dead to become a saint. My brother just needed to be born. From the day my mother told her parents she was pregnant, my grandfather was convinced the baby would be a boy and would be born on his birthday. And he was. November 24th, 1956. My mother even gave him my grandfather's name. The crazy thing was that before Robert was born, my grandfather went to the Ford dealer and told them he wanted a new car to bring his grandson home from the hospital, and that he would be born on his birthday. I became chopped liver. The family mantra soon became, Robert never does anything wrong, and it's been this way for 16 years, except he does lots of things wrong, and Mama just excuses him. She says, he didn't mean to, or she gives him some other excuse. Like when he tells Mama I'm cheating when I'm not. I play to win. If he wants to win, he needs to step up his game. Like all the times he doesn't do his homework. And even like the time he smoked pot. Not his fault. It must be nice to be so perfect. Meanwhile, I bust my ass with my grades and everything else, but I remain second best, invisible most of the time. I'm always in trouble. Now it's Friday night, and I don't have a date, and my parents are making me go with them to family night at St. Robert's Boy Scout Camp. The truth is, I'm too busy with flying, music, debate, and schoolwork to be interested in boys. If I'm going to get my pilot certificate on my 17th birthday, I need to stay on track. Besides, anywhere would be better than Boy Scout camp. I just got home from debate camp at Duke University, and I'd love to spend the evening with my debate partner and best friend, Vicky, especially since we're defending our state championship. But she's at the beach with her parents, and my other best friend is grounded. I have no excuse. Even Daddy has put his foot down and says I have to go support St. Robert.
I don't think this is memoir. I mean, it says memoir, but it's written like fiction. It reads like YA fiction. It's in first person. It is not in its present tense. Like, if this is meant to be memoir, you are writing it as fiction. As fiction, if we take it, let's just assume it's supposed to actually be first person fiction. It's a really great opening. I think it stays a little too long in the introspective space. I would have liked to, once we get to the end of the first paragraph that's about once we get a little bit about Robert and the fact that he can't do anything wrong, and there's this great line where like when he tells Mama I'm cheating when I'm not, I play to win. Like, I love that as like a last line of that opening, and then like give me something happening in scene. Like, show me something that, an action, dialogue, like transition out of like the person's head and into the world. So again, if it's fiction, we need to get to the story faster. If it's memoir, you need to rethink the way that you're positioning this because it doesn't read like one. It really is a great first two lines, though. Like,
Yes, it
very
is.
good.
Yes.
Let's see. This is also a memoir titled Dark Light. I am in the wrong place. In front of me, my youth pastor is admonishing me and other teenagers from premarital sex. The crowd quiets. A voice in me blares, "Go home, now, get up, leave, drive home," something says. I stand, my friends look up at me. I scrounge for my car keys, leave. I'm running out of the church's foyer, scanning the cars for my rusty red 1989 Honda Accord. This is diary, it says, hurry. With each gear I reach, I know I'm getting closer to something that will forever change who I am. Lurching my car to a stop in the driveway, I see my dad staggering beneath the trellis. My dad and I built that trellis, a verdant entrance to my mom's garden covered in flowers, ivy, and through it, a smooth walking path of granite stones connected like a foundation. His figure is dark, like a loose line jutting up and down, sideways EKGs. I crank up my e-brake, I throw open the driver's door and run to my dad. "Are you okay, Dad?" Help me, he cries. "There's blood all over my head." I scan him. No blood on his face or clothing. "Dad, there's no blood on you." "What do you mean?" "No, you don't get it. I'm hurt. Don't you see the blood on me?" I look at our porch, long and made of Spanish arches. Most nights, each arch would be lit, showcasing the architecture, the entrance to our home. Now, only a few lights shine, cobwebs obscuring their luminosity. In the shadows, I see our dog's chain, untethered and draped across the steps to the front door.
I wanted to, we have this,
Line where he says, like, "Don't you see the blood on me?" And then the narrative shifts and starts describing the house again. And I was like, why? What about the blood, though? Or the lack of blood? I like this as an opening page, though. It's got a lot of tension and a lot of voice. And I like that it sort of starts in this very relatable teen space of like the youth pastor and going home, and then everything changes. I think you need to stay in that moment with the dad a little more and not pull back.
I actually felt that the shift, there was too much of a shift at the beginning for me. I liked the opening where he was running away from the youth group. I thought that was really funny. I kind of got lost when, although now that I'm reading this, I realize that how I heard it was different than how this is written. I thought he was being lectured about premarital sex and was like, I have to get out of here because I don't want to hear this. But now that I'm looking, I realize he thinks something's wrong at home. So that I can see it on the paper, but I did not hear that. Something is wrong at home and he feels it and he leaves. I thought it was because he didn't want to get lectured about premarital sex. So, okay, I would just make it clearer that he feels that something is wrong at home, and I don't know, that just wasn't obviously clear because I didn't understand that. My initial comment is actually not even really accurate now that I'm looking at this, but I would just make that clear.
Yeah.
Even reading it, it's not that clear.
Yeah.
Like it does.
No, it's not super clear.
Yeah, the setup of.
I think I get it.
I'm in the wrong place in front of me. The youth pastor is admonishing me about premarital sex. It sounds like a setup for a joke a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
When really, I think what the author is saying is, I'm here, but I should be at home.
Yeah.
I think that.
And that's not clear.
Use that line. I thought I heard some great descriptions in there.
Yeah.
And I was getting drawn into the scene.
Yeah.
Getting drawn into the scene, and somewhere when they went back off into the house again, I was like, whoa. So I think like keep me in that scene. And this is a memoir.
Yeah.
And it kind of has a strong fiction read to it for me, yeah.
One of the things the author and I talked about was whether this should be a fictionalized memoir or it should be fictionalized, because it has such a strong fiction
Fictionalize it.
voice, and it's more than one person that's memoirs here. So I do think this could be a really
Great
lovely
fiction.
narrative.
Yeah. Make it
Yes.
a novel.
Make it a novel.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
This is YA fantasy. And it says lost in the non. So when you're 17 and all you've ever known is what you know, you're desperate to be let in on a secret. You're desperate to have all the answers. Or maybe it's just me. All my friends say I'm different. Sometimes they say I'm an old soul. I'm pretty sure it's not a compliment though, considering they only say it when I won't sneak out or get drunk at one of Kyle Moore's stupid bonfire parties. They say, Kat, although I prefer Catherine, let's live for now. But that scares me more than anything. If I live for now, how can I control what's coming next? I admit it, I'm a goody-goody, a prude, a bore, or whatever people call kids who don't drink, don't do drugs, and don't have sex before they finish high school. Let me explain myself though. I don't do any of those things because I'm looking beyond the bonfires, the classes, the curfews. I have a plan for my future.
For me, this is just way too much interiority right out of the gate, and especially knowing that this is a YA fantasy, I really want to be situated in space and time and know more about where we are than just broadcasting sort of this character talking about herself. We can definitely just see that play out in her interactions with people, especially there's even like quotes from her friends, so let's just see that interaction with her friends.
I would have liked it if it opened up with her like at a bonfire sitting on the sidelines not participating, and that would have shown me what I'm currently being told.
literary fiction, In the Belly of the Beast. Memories treacherous. I think I remember that morning as clearly as if it happened yesterday, but that could be a mistake since I only recall much of the past in fragments, or like a mirror of something I saw at the movies or read in a book. I no longer know for sure what was real then and what seems real now. So I try not to talk about the past as if it happened. Still, I can't not talk about the past because who I am now is all about who I think I was then and what I think happened to that version of me, which means I'm no expert on the past. So what I think happened was that Go Boy stepped on a bouncing Betty and got his balls blown off. We had just left our NDP at dawn and were cautiously but closely paralleling a high-speed trail looking for the NDA that intelligence had reported was out there. And because intelligence said the trail was being regularly used by Charlie, we weren't as worried as normal that there might be mine booby traps planted right along it. The NDA were mean as snakes, but they weren't stupid. But I guess we were that morning. Anyway, one minute we were moving with stealth, and the next Go Boy was screaming out, "Down!" As we all instinctively hit the dirt, the mine went off, and dozens of steel balls exploded into the air. Then, Go Boy was crying out in gasps and shrieks, and my other buddies were hollering out in pain. Me too. My legs were on fire. Nobody died that day, all because of Go Boy's quick thinking, but we were still hurt pretty bad. Later, we learned that Go Boy had heard that distinctive click when he stepped on the mine. And since he had learned how to recognize and disarm Bettys on his first deployment, knew that his only chance to live was to plant himself face down in the jungle dirt. The shrapnel flew mainly straight up in the air, as it was designed to maim and kill the poor fucker who stepped on it.
Hands.
This reminded me of Joseph Heller a little bit, or like Slaughterhouse-Five, like those novels from the 20th century. And I love the use of names, Go Boy. I mean, that first paragraph, I was thinking, okay, we're kind of like staying in generalities here a little bit with the memory stuff, but then suddenly, like, that first line of that second paragraph. So what I think happened was that Go Boy stepped on a bouncing Betty and got his balls blown off, and I was like, oh shit. Like, it really changed. I do think, and I think that was effective. I think this person could probably shorten that first memory paragraph. There's some really good lines in there that would stand out more if there was a little less we had to read through. But once we get through that, once we get into it a little bit, I do think you have to root us in time more, because it starts to feel a little summarizing. So I actually do like this, but I think we need to get rooted more quickly in what's happening now and not stay in this summarizing the past moment for quite as long.
Echoing the note about the first paragraph kind of lost me, but the second one was much more engaging. I think this is just a pet peeve of mine, but I am not a big fan of anyway as an introductor to a paragraph, because to me that says I got off track and what I was saying was not important. So anyway, let me get back to the story at hand. I think the voice is like good here, but I felt just a little bit lost with the memory paragraph, and it felt just a little bit too like stream of consciousness for me.
It did have the feeling of, I think that's why I thought of those novels, it doesn't really feel like books today.
Yeah.
In a way that might make things hard. It doesn't mean that there's something, I mean, I do think there's work to be done. It just doesn't really read like most novels do right now, which could be good and could be hard.
Well, you said what I was going to say, which is it was kind of a bit too telly for me, and I wanted to know what was going on, kind of like now, what's going on
I agree. Too telling, and it felt kind of like flippant, like, okay, well this, but then that, anyway, and so that really, I was like,
I kind of liked that though.
The flippant way he's talking about this guy getting injured and how he's so, it felt realistic, like if you were in that space and you were used to this kind of thing happening, like you might be kind of flippant or talk about it like it's not a big deal, but
It has a dead body face.
it has the dead body. I don't know, I found there's something like compelling about this. It's not perfect, but I did find there'd be something compelling.
This is black amethyst, and it's fantasy. Fire raged in the distance. Red-orange flames grew as Clara drew nearer. Running, she headed toward the tree line. Heat met her skin. Smoke filled her lungs. Flames encompassed the brown of her eyes. She coughed, watching a single house burn to the ground. Wood and glass crumpled under the heat. Nothing but the sound of dancing fire played in her ears. No. The word left her lips, but she couldn't yet understand its significance. What was she seeing? Whose house was this? Consumed by an inferno, the house sitting alone on an unmarked street burned brighter than the sun, producing a blaze of fire that blasted Clara back, forcing her from her sleep.
Hands.
Too much description getting in the way of the story moving forward. For me, it felt like there was like I was being held at arm's length by the amount of description instead of really being part, like in the story.
I personally enjoyed it because I felt like I was like really like dealing with like her and dealing with the fire and the flames and experience it myself. So I actually enjoyed it, and I remember talking to the author about it, and so I think they did a good job.
I would say what jarred me was when it said no, the word left her mouth. The part that jarred me out of the story was, but she couldn't yet understand its significance. So I got caught up in that, and I started to go, what does she mean by, is she talking about the no, the fire, what is
It's
she
a little telling.
Yeah, so I started to get caught up in that. So I think like, even if you just said no, we all understand, like there's a fire going on. If somebody says no, what that means, that's how I took it, that's why she was saying no, I couldn't tell. And then if you just went, whose house was this? So I think somewhere along there, something within the dialogue there that kind of jarred me out of it, and then I just was trying to keep up with everything that was going on. So the descriptions kind of interfered with me understanding what was happening there. Hopefully that makes sense. What I'm saying.
Sometimes too much description, you're like picturing
Trying to
so
process
much
it,
that
yeah.
you don't know what's actually happening.
What you said.
Yeah, I would echo that, and also just add that I think it's really hard to open a book where the character is confused right out of the gate, because it makes the reader get also confused when we're not yet grounded in what's happening. So when the first thought is, what am I even looking at? Whose house is this? It's kind of irrelevant because the reader also doesn't know anything yet, and we don't know who this person is. So I just think it's hard to do confusion as the first emotion that we get from a character.
This one is YA. Weaving It Together is the title. June 6, 1976. Right at the worst possible moment, with everyone looking at me, the zipper on my skirt broke. Just busted as I stood up, splitting apart as if it couldn't take it anymore. It happened right at the end when everyone was all quiet and somber. We stood up and rip, my slip was showing. My first thought was that Ruthie was going to be mad. It was her skirt after all, and she was very particular with her clothes. That was one of the ways we were different. My sister Ruthie's clothes were neatly lined up in her closet, tops and bottoms separated and arranged by color, halter tops and cutoffs folded in little squares on the side shelf, bell-bottom pants and miniskirts hanging in orderly rows.
I just didn't know where we were. She says she stands up in the front row or something, but I didn't, front row of what? It just felt a little too like floating in space. I like that it opens with the skirt rip, but I think we need to back up in time a little bit and establish the scene and where we are before the rip.
I agree, and I think it focused too much on the skirt, and then it started transitioning into like her clothes versus her, her sister's clothes, and I'm like, why do I need to know about this? Like, what is the purpose of presenting this?
I'll echo what everyone said, but when she said, my first thought was that Ruthie was going to be mad. I kind of wanted to know a little bit about that, even, or when she said it happened right at the end. That's what stopped me, because I was just like, end of what? The end of a concert, the end of a lecture, the end of a funeral. So I think if you ground us a little bit more in the scene, that would keep us from coming out of the scene that you're trying to put us into.
Anybody else?
This is also YA, the surface of water. Fire is my favorite element. What I like best about fire is the sound. First, the crack of ignition, followed by the wind of acceleration as it starts to spread. Then the shattering of glass as the windows blow out. And the roar as timbers and walls collapse, hitting the ground with what sounds like thunderous applause. The scream of sirens splitting the air and your eardrums. Watching fire is a visceral experience, and it makes me feel powerful. The fire I remember best is the first one. It was my grandparents' garage, a frame building that sat at the back of the house and was accessible from an alley that ran behind the street. I was too young to say I had planned it, so I guess it was an accident. But it was the first time I understood causality and realized that I was a force in my little world. From then on, I took a special interest in every outcome I was warned about. When my mother told me, "Don't do that to Cece, you'll hurt her," I knew she was telling me what I was capable of doing. Here's what I remember. A hard rainstorm had knocked down a nest of tent caterpillars from a tree alongside the garage. Many of the caterpillars were dead, rigid like dark question marks in their filmy sack. I poked it with a stick, then picked it up and took it inside the garage. My grandparents never locked the side door. I decided to see what would happen if I burned the nest. The red gasoline can used to fuel the lawnmower felt empty, but I tipped it over anyway, and some gas splashed out on the floor. It made a small wet spot. I took matches out of some plastic drawers, fumbled through a few attempts to strike one, and tossed it at the nest as it flared. Flames leaped from the floor. I closed the door as I ran, thinking that would contain the blaze. I went inside for supper. My mother saw the flames from the kitchen window. "Dad, fire! The garage is burning! Get the phone!"
I really liked this a lot. I thought it was cool that we see the fire through the sounds it makes. That is so smart because we hear and see, like you get two sense experiences out of that. I will say then the last line of that paragraph is watching fire is a visceral experience, but you start by talking about sound. So I would change that to listening to fire. But I thought it was really cool. Also that line about like, I knew she was telling me what I was capable of doing. I was like, whoa. I just thought this was very cool, and I definitely would keep reading. So send this to me.
Hang on. Send it to me first. So I know I raised my hand, but it was because it's hard for me to sometimes turn off the editing hat. So there were things that I would like have cut off on there, but it's just so creepy this character that I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a psychotic thriller. I'm thinking, because it says YA, so it just said YA, so I'm thinking it's a YA thriller. I'm thinking, I hope, please don't say it's a romance. But anyway, so I mean.
Still send it to me.
Send it to me first. No, Lauren would be amazing. So anyway, but there were things that I really liked there. It just needs a little, I think, fine tuning.
Yeah.
Why I raised my hand, but and Lauren beat me too. I was gonna say I raised my hand for something good, like, well, I could see so much great things here, but I don't know how old the character is right here, and I think it was a younger, probably. I'm thinking, this is just me. I'm making up my own story now. I'm thinking it's like an 8-year-old or so, somebody younger.
But I think it's teen.
But no, it's teen. I'm talking the character here at this age when they
in
first
the-
discovered. I'm thinking it's like an 8-year-old. That's my opinion, right? But so that word causality, I'm like, I don't know if they would understand it, that word there. But the rest of it, I think, was just. There's some great descriptions. There's some great creepy things here. Some things that show the making of a great psychotic arsonist, you know. And so I just loved it too when you went inside for supper all calm and quiet, just waiting for the parents to discover that something's on fire. And I was like, wow, who is this creepy kid?
It is hard to go into backstory so quickly. This person is really managing it, but I would want to see them fast, like get us back to the present day soon, so that we're back in a teen POV. But yeah, I think this was really well done.
Yes, yeah. Like, funny enough, it felt like a prologue to me.
Because it's a
of the backstory, yeah.
Yeah.
It is hard to go back so quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it was really gripping. I would, at a minimum, I would keep reading, and I think that's what matters.
Yeah.
To start.
Yeah, you definitely had me at the nest of dried up caterpillars like question marks.
Yeah, it's a great line.
This is a thriller. Vanishing Kiara. Kiara Blackwell checked her phones. 4:30 p.m. Central. Nearly sunset light. The statue facing southwest, its cover dropped only seconds before. She almost smiled. The Art Deco dancer. She let her eyes begin at the top and scanned slowly down the figure. The dancer's nude body glowed golden underneath the red wrap. She sighed a final yes when her eyes reached the solid black marble plinth. The dancer's toes barely touched it, but its size and weight anchored the piece firmly to the Mississippi ground. Almost 9 months of her life invested, and based on the chatter she was hearing around her, not one moment of it wasted. She snapped a selfie, her face in the lower corner, the dancer taking up most of the frame, and texted it to her husband. Kiara did not know if or when he might retrieve it. She'd been so involved in her work, it was only now she realized he hadn't responded in 2 or was it 3 weeks. Someone tapped her on the shoulder, and she didn't think of him again until much later when she was running for her life. Festivities finally over, Kiara left the art center to meet the Uber Mayor Harris had called. She opened the back passenger door of the extended cab truck and slid in. She had a split-second thought about how strange to be in a truck instead of a sedan as they pulled away. Almost immediately, the car stopped again. The driver's side back door opened and another man got in. The driver hit the gas hard enough that Kiara bounced back against the seat. She looked at the unexpected passenger, about to ask the obvious question, when he reached for her. She recoiled as he tried to grab her. Kiara did not scream. She turned and placed her back against her door and kicked straight forward with her left leg. She landed a solid blow with the blocky high heel of her shoe. Blood burst from the man's nose, and he screamed a curse in Portuguese. The driver slammed the brake, throwing both passengers forward. He turned to the bleeding man and spat out, "Get her drugged, now!" He lunged toward her, but Kiara opened her door and half pushed, half slid herself backwards out of the car. She rolled once and landed in a seated position. She pulled one shoe off, then the other, and ran.
I really liked this a lot. The realization she hasn't actually heard from her husband in 2 or 3 weeks like really struck me. This reminded me a little bit of the beginning of it's a totally different kind of genre, but do you guys see the Sandra Bullock romance movie where like she's kidnapped by Harry Potter and then has to be saved? Yeah, saved by Channing Tatum, by Magic Mike. It's like actually really good. Anyway, but that open, I think like this person might benefit by watching the opening like 20 minutes of that movie for pacing, because it has a similar setup where like the author, we get to know the author a little bit, she does an event, we see her interact with a couple people, we get a sense for her, and then suddenly she gets kidnapped. And by the time she gets kidnapped, this is no spoilers, what the whole movie's about, but by the time she gets kidnapped, like we know who she is, what her backstory is, what her problem is, like who's in her life, what we think this is going to be about, and then it changes. And I think this kidnapping is happening too fast. We need another scene or two. We need to see her interact at this gala. We need more so that we see her in her life a little more before she gets kidnapped.
Yeah, and just to echo that, and that I thought the opening with the art piece was really strong, and I would love to stay in that a little more, because I was very interested in it, and I feel like I got thrown out of it a little too fast.
Yeah.
Agreed, and also send it to me.
Yeah. If you do those revisions, then I'd like to see it too.
All right. We have time for one more, and it's almost 4:45, and Zach needs to come up and talk a little bit before we leave for the day, so I will read this one. Yep. Where the Roots Tangle in its Southern Gothic. Chapter 1. Edwina, August 3rd, 1929. Even the gin was too humid. The piney tang of it tingled on my lips and washed a burning path to my core. I could almost hear my mama clucking on about wrinkles and creases as my lips pulled tight and my eyes squinched. Stretching my legs out to rest on the banister, the old wooden chair beneath me creaked as it leaned back on 2 legs. It was satisfying seeing my bare, dirty feet up on that fancy carved wood painted bright white. Everything from the pristine balcony to the big house it was attached to, all the way to the split rail fence up by the road nearly a half-mile away, was too elegant for someone like me. Sweat trickled down the curve of my spine and coated my face. The sun had set hours ago, but the night hadn't cooled off. Georgia's dog days didn't care that it was almost fall. They weren't ready to give up the ghost. The stubborn, rainless summer slathered itself all over me, leaving a thick stickiness in its path. I took another sip of gin, closing my eyes and rolling the heat of it around on my tongue. Some of that ritzy ice they have downstairs would be the bee's knees, but that would require going inside where the privileged folks were. New wrinkles cropped up as I snarled. Mama wasn't here to care anyway. I could hear them just below me. Their nauseating chatter pierced through with laughter so fake and fragile it could have been made of glass. It was competing a little too much with the chorus of frogs and katydids in the trees for my liking. Not even the rowdier fellows back home up in Shinetown got that loud. I don't think the old folks would let them. They'd holler at them to dry up, and they'd do it. Someone else would have to be the one to hush the crowd in the parlor below. I can't go tell them to shut it for the same reason that I can't go get ice. You're not supposed to be here, Edwina. The edge of panic in her voice tasted like southern peaches gone too soft in the summer sun. A mustiness polluted the sweet. But you always have very good gin. I tipped my glass and arched a pinky, and you know how hard it is to find the good stuff anymore. Tilting my head back dramatically, I downed the rest of the astringently floral liquor. My sister wasn't at all impressed by the wide grin I flashed at her, or my coy wink. Her round cheeks heated to a bright pink, and those enormous brown eyes hit the floor. I knew they would. Josephine's feathers had always been easy to ruffle. How could she look so much like Mama and act so different? And this is Southern Gothic.
I would definitely keep reading on, and I don't say that strictly as a Southern woman who also sits on my porch barefoot drinking gin, which I am. But I do feel like we spend a little too much time in her head right out of the gate. But I love the setting. I love Southern Gothic. I would definitely like to see this, and I would keep reading.
I definitely was drawn into that scene with everything. I did start wondering things like, you know, where is she a little bit more? Or was there an event going on? I'm visual, so I'd have to see the print.
Yeah.
But it felt like her sister came out of the blue, or am I?
No,
I
I
couldn't
mean,
tell.
there's 3 hefty paragraphs of
Yeah.
description. I think she probably could have gotten that down into maybe 2.
Okay.
And there's this great line where she says,
I can't go tell them to shut it for the same reason that I can't go get ice. I
I
wanted a
love
paragraph
that.
break and then one
Yes.
line that was like, because I'm whatever it is. Like, is
Yes.
she help?
is she, like, I
Yes.
don't know why, actually.
That's what I'm
She
trying
says
to
for the
figure
same
out.
reason, but like I don't know what that reason is.
Yeah. But yeah, some really good writing there,
Yeah.
and it definitely drew me in. I definitely would look at that too. Yeah.
All right.